Right, buckle up for a deep dive, and this one is going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, wild's one way to put it.
Today we're taking a look at Rodney Alcala.
The so-called dating game killer.
Yeah, I know you hear that and you think, wait, what?
It's a case that really gets under your skin, that's for sure.
That's why we're doing deep dive on it.
Absolutely.
We've got Wikipedia, some articles, even a true crime podcast, all kind of grappling with, like, who was this guy?
What made him tick, right.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, what makes this case so interesting, I think, is how much it makes you question, like, how well can you ever really know someone?
Oh, yeah.
Alcala was smart, charismatic, charming enough to end up on a game show.
Right. And not just any game show, like the dating game.
Exactly. But underneath it all, you know, a stone-cold killer.
Yeah, it's that classic thing where appearances can be so deceiving.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, who would ever look at some guy on a dating show and think, oh, yeah, that's a murderer?
It's like a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
And, you know, it really gets you thinking about, like, how do we judge who's dangerous? How do we assess risk in our lives? You know, Alcala was able to, like, blend in, gain people's trust, and that was a big part of why he got away with it for so long.
It makes you kind of look over your shoulder.
Yeah.
You know? So let's start back at the beginning with his early life.
Okay, so our sources say he's born in Texas in 43, moved to L.A. as a kid.
Seems pretty normal so far.
Yeah, on the surface, totally normal.
Right.
But even then, you know, there are these little hints, these signs of, you know, something darker.
Oh, interesting.
He's smart, no question, join the army.
Mm-hmm.
But even there, he gets a medical discharge.
Really?
Well, back then they called it a nervous breakdown.
Oh, wow.
And there were these accusations of, you know, sexual misconduct with women.
So there were already some, like, red flags.
Yeah, definitely some concerning behavior.
Right.
And it's important to say, not every kid with a tough childhood ends up, you know, hurting people, but it can be a factor, especially when you see that aggression focused on women.
It makes you wonder what could have been different, you know?
Absolutely. The what-ifs in these cases are always haunting.
Yeah, like what if someone had stepped in, you know, taken those early warning signs seriously?
You never know. Maybe things could have gone a different way.
But anyway, it doesn't end there. He goes to UCLA, even studies film with Roman Polanski at NYU.
Wow, really?
Yeah. He starts using this alias John Berger.
I wonder why the name change. Was he, like, already trying to create this separate identity, knowing that he had this, you know, this darkness inside him?
Ooh, that's creepy.
Right.
And that brings us to, I think, a turning point. The Tali Shapiro attack in 1968.
Oh, yeah. That's a tough one.
He lured this 8-year-old girl into his apartment.
Awful.
It was brutal. I won't go into the details.
Good call.
But thankfully, a witness saw something, called the police.
Thank goodness.
But Alcala, he got away.
Became a fugitive.
This is where things get really intense, you know. He's already violent, but now he's on the run.
Right, and it's only going to get worse from here.
Yeah, that's a good place to stop for now.
Take a breath.
Yeah, process all this.
Because we've got a lot more to unpack with Rodney Alcala.
Okay, so Alcala's behind bars, finally, right? But something tells me it's not that simple.
You'd be right to think that, unfortunately. This is where we start to see just how much the justice system, well, failed, really.
Yeah, what happened with the Tali Shapiro case? I mean, attacking a kid like that, you'd think there'd be serious consequences.
You'd think so, but here's the thing. Tali and her family had moved to Mexico by then.
Oh, wow.
They couldn't testify.
So?
Instead of facing attempted murder charges, they offered Alcala a plea deal.
You're kidding, right? A plea deal.
Yeah, he pleads guilty to child molestation and stuffs just over a year.
A year. That's it.
That's it. It's mind-boggling.
It's like they practically set him up to do it again.
It's a tragic pattern we see a lot. Back then, especially. They just didn't understand these types of predators.
And they didn't have to wait long for him to prove them wrong, did they?
Nope. Less than 2 months after he's out, he assaults another young girl.
Ugh. It's like a ticking time bomb, you know? Every time they let him out, it was just a matter of time.
Back to prison he goes, but guess what? Gets out early again.
Ugh, this is infuriating.
And then, this is almost unbelievable, his parole officer gives him permission to go to New York City.
Wait, hold on. They let him travel across the country, knowing all this.
Yep. A decision that makes absolutely no sense to me.
What happened in New York?
He murders Ellen Jane Hover. Her dad owned a famous nightclub.
Oh, man.
Took years to find her remains. Buried near a spot where another woman had reported being photographed by John Berger.
His alias. It's like he was leaving clues on purpose, almost taunting them.
Yeah, that arrogance, thinking he's smarter than everyone else, it definitely comes through. So we've got this guy, already a convicted murderer, a fugitive, and get this.
What?
He gets a job as a typesetter for the LA Times.
No way, seriously. Like a normal 9 to 5.
Yep. Talk about hiding in plain sight.
And during all this, he's still taking those creepy photos, right?
Oh, yeah, convincing these young women to pose for him. Lots of explicit stuff.
I remember they released some of those photos years later, trying to identify people.
Heartbreaking, looking at those faces, not knowing what happened to them.
Police thought some of them could be victims, right?
It's such a chilling thought. And all this is before the dating game, right?
Yeah, before he became like a celebrity killer.
Right. In 1978, he charms his way onto the show, wins a date with Cheryl Bradshaw.
It's almost funny, in a really messed up way.
Talk about a master manipulator. Luckily for Cheryl, she got a bad vibe from him and backed out.
Dodged a bullet there.
Big time. But for others, it wasn't so lucky. He kills Jill Barkham, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and then there's Robin Samso, 12 years old.
God, that's awful. He seemed to be getting worse, more brutal.
There was this cruelty to it, this need to control, to dominate. It wasn't just about killing anymore, but finally, the Robin Samson case, that's what brings him down.
How so?
They put out a sketch based on witnesses, and guess who recognizes him?
Don't tell me.
His own parole officer. He saw him on the dating game.
Wow, that's some crazy irony. The show that made him famous also got him caught.
Full circle. You can't outrun your past forever. But with Alcala, even being caught was just the start of another chapter.
Trials, appeals, the whole legal circus.
Yep. This is where things get really complicated, and we see even more just how dark this guy was.
Okay, so Alcala's finally behind bars, but knowing this guy, I bet it's not the end of the story.
Oh, not even close. And this is where it gets, I don't know, even more disturbing in a way.
What do you mean?
Remember all those photos?
The ones he took of the women.
Hundreds of them. In 2010, the police in Huntington Beach and New York City, they decide to release some of them. They're hoping someone might recognize somebody, you know? Maybe some of these women are missing. Maybe they were victims.
Oh man, that's heavy.
Can you imagine being a family looking through those photos?
Ugh, be terrifying. Hoping you don't see someone you know.
Exactly. Each photo could be another case, another life lost.
So, did it work? Does anyone come forward?
Yeah, actually. Dozens of women recognized themselves. Some families were able to, well, get some closure, at least.
That's something, at least.
It's bittersweet for sure. But there was one case, Christine Ruth Thornton.
What about her?
Disappeared in 1977. She was 6 months pregnant at the time.
Oh God, that's awful.
They actually found her remains in Wyoming back in 1982.
Really?
But they didn't know who she was. Not until 2015 when they could do DNA testing.
Wow, so DNA finally gave her a name after all those years.
And it linked her to Alcala.
No way.
They charged him in 2016.
So he was held accountable, at least for that one.
Well, sort of. He died in prison in 2021 before they could extradite him to Wyoming for trial.
Natural causes, I assume.
Yep. So he never faced a jury for Christine's murder.
It's frustrating, but at least her family knows what happened.
Absolutely. That's one reason they kept investigating, even after he was caught.
Right, trying to solve all those other cases.
Especially those New York murders. Cornelia Crilly and Helen Jane Hover.
What happened with those?
They finally indicted him in 2011 in Manhattan. He actually pleaded guilty a year later.
Oh, after all that time.
Added another 25 years to his sentence. Not that it mattered much at that point.
It's crazy to think how many lives he affected, how much pain he caused.
He was a true predator, you know, moving around, using different names, leaving a trail of victims everywhere he went.
And we may never know the full extent of it.
That's right, there are still those photos, hundreds of them, with no names attached.
It's a chilling thought. Each one a potential victim, just gone.
It makes you realize how important it is to trust your gut. Like Cheryl Bradshaw, she got a bad feeling about Alcala and backed out of that date.
Who knows what would happen if she hadn't.
We also have to look at the system, you know? They had chances to stop him time and time again.
And we do.
We got to learn from these mistakes, make sure it doesn't happen again. This deep dive, it's been a tough one, but it's so important to remember these stories, to keep fighting for justice.
Absolutely. Alcala may be gone, but the search for answers, for the truth, it doesn't stop.
And we can't forget the victims, their families, their stories deserve to be heard.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been dark, but important. Until next time, everyone, stay safe and stay informed.